To use the small Synclastic former, you want to take a piece of annealed metal that is 1/2 inch or narrower. If you do use metal that's about 1/2 inch thick, you will probably need to repeat the process a couple of times, annealing in between. The first step is to raise the handle enough to insert your metal, and then align it so that the end of the metal is basically centered between the urethane and the former. Now, with the small Synclastic, the curve of the former goes this way as well as around this direction. So you want to make sure that your strip is centered on this curve. And make sure that it's centered front and back. We're going to press the handle down, lift it back up, and you can see the beginning of the small Synclastic curve beginning to take shape. We'll put the strip back in, scoot it forward, maybe 1/8 of an inch to 1/16 of an inch, and then press again. We will raise the handle, scoot it forward, press again. And the smaller steps you take, the smoother the transition between the different bends will be. You can see here, the metal is forming quite well. It's a really smooth curve with no jagged bends that can happen if you take too big of steps. So let's continue forming it. You want to keep your metal centered on the former. We'll take a few more steps. Okay, now let's take a better look. So here is the small Synclastic beginning to take shape. So this is what you can get when you take the small steps. On this end, I'm going to show you what it looks like when you take too big of steps. You won't get as smooth of a curve. So like before, I'm going to press the end just because that is where you want to start. And instead of scooting forward just a tiny bit, I'm going to scoot forward a bunch. Oops. Press the metal, and then we'll scoot forward again. A whole lot more than we want to. This is what not to do. Press it, and we're going to do the same thing again. Okay, now let's take a look. You can see the different steps. So there's this kind of flat area here, this flat area here. That is why you want to take the smallest steps you can. Even if it takes a little bit longer, you'll get a nice, smooth, even curve. I also wanted to show you what happens when you use full hard metal versus annealed or dead soft metal. This is full hard. I've patterned it, and it's probably 20 gauge, I'd say. We're going to start it the same way we did the annealed metal. I'm making sure that it's centered on the former. Oops. Get that end in there. I'm going to press it once, scoot it forward about 1/8 of an inch, press again, scoot it forward, press again. You can also use thicker material. The curve just won't be as pronounced. Do one more little step. You can see the metal has begun to form. I'm going to do a little bit more, show you, and then I'm going to anneal the strip and show you the difference. So we will scoot it forward, give it a little push. Again, I'm using my fingers on pressing on like either side of the former just to make sure that the metal is centered. I'm also holding the metal here. You can see I'm pressing my finger against the former. This is to just also help keep it registered and in line with the former. You can see the metal has formed. So if you were going to use this for a cuff, I would make sure that you take little steps just to make sure to avoid any of these flat spots. But let me show you what it looks like when the metal is annealed. Here is that same piece of copper that I was using before. This was the end that I formed while it was full hard. I've now annealed it. So I'm going to repeat the process, insert the metal, make sure it's centered on the former. We'll press once, scoot it forward, a small step, press again, another small step. I'm going to work the metal back and forth, keeping it centered. I just want to try and get as much of this formed as possible so I can show you the difference. Another fun thing that you can do is if you're starting to notice that your metal is forming unevenly, you can slightly rotate the metal forward or backward depending on any adjustments that you need to make. You can go over the same areas twice. You're going to make sure I get that end really well. Oops, it was a little off center, so I'll just try it again. So here we go. This is the end that I formed after annealing, and this is the end that I formed while the metal was still hard. You can see there's a very pronounced curve on the end that was annealed first versus when the metal was full hard. You sort of just get this single peak in the middle. Also, the metal is more evenly formed across the width, whereas on the side that was full hard, it sort of has this ridge in the middle. This is just a visual to show you the difference between forming full hard metal versus annealed metal. Another thing you can use the small Synclastic former for is bringing the ends of a cuff bracelet into a tighter radius so that it fits better around the wrist. Even though this is smaller, you can still get that tighter curve, and I will show you how. You don't want to start forming it right at the very end of the metal. You want to scoot the cuff forward maybe a ½ inch or so that you start forming away from the end of the strip. Then you want to gently press. You don't want to press full force. You just want to gently press a little bit, keep the metal aligned, scoot it forward a touch, scoot it forward again. Again, I'm not pressing as hard as I can. I'm just doing a gentle push to bring that end in slightly. I'll form about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of this end of the cuff. Oops. Go back over the same areas if you want. This is just to make sure that I've formed it evenly and that everything looks the way I want it to. And you can see how this side has now begun to create a tighter curve than the other side. So this cuff was formed with the large Synclastic former. And because I wanted to make the cuff less circular and more oval shaped, I've started to bring this end in just a little bit to make this a tighter curve. You can see there is a slight ridge that is formed. That's perfectly fine. And what this is doing is it's just tightening up the curve of this section right here, bringing this end in tighter.